the number of jobs that in-house teams and law firms have put out overseas, you're seeing, I think, a number of those jobs, tens, hundreds of thousands of those jobs will probably disappear. And you'll be able to reshore in-house where you know the business, you know your clients, you know your business lines, you know your products and services and customers, and you'll be able to drive more value for the business from an in-house team, not from overseas, not from a law firm. And we're excited to be a part of that growth proposition for those in-house teams.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way.
My guest today is Daniel Hayter, Managing Director and Vice President for Europe at Axiom Law, a global leader in flexible on-demand legal talent. Since joining Axiom in 2021, Daniel has overseen the firm's growth across the UK, Germany, and Switzerland, helping corporate legal teams rethink how they resource, scale, and adopt new technologies. A frequent commentator on the future of legal work, Daniel has written extensively on AI adoption, legal operations, and the evolving relationship between talent, technology, and value. Daniel, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Great, thanks, Belden, and thank you very much for the invitation. I feel very privileged to be asked onto the podcast.
Oh, thank you for that. But no, I'm really glad to have you. Really, really glad. So for any listeners who might not be familiar with Axiom, how would you describe what the firm does, its size, and how it's changing the way legal work gets done?
Yeah, so Axiom invented what's known as the alternative legal services industry 25 years ago this year, actually. So it's our birthday and remains the market leader. We are the world's largest ALSP. We have a global footprint spanning the US, Canada, UK, Switzerland, and Germany, as you mentioned, but also Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia. We're currently serving about 3,500 legal departments globally, a large percentage of the Fortune 100 and FTSE 100. And in Europe alone, we have over 3,000 lawyers across those three countries. We are a one-stop shop across 16 different practice areas, 32 different industries. And in terms of how we are changing the way legal work gets done, we're seeing a bit of a fundamental shift. We're moving legal from, I think, what you would call a binary model, where you just had in-house legal teams and law firms, to what I would call a four-pillar approach. So we are adding flexible legal talent as a strategic third option, as well as an additional layer of technology in the form of AI. So that's sort of the fundamental shift that we're seeing, have seen, and continue to see.
Just so anybody who doesn't sort of know the way that dynamic between in-house and law firms work, how's what you're providing different? What's the interaction between an in-house team and a law firm, and how does it work once Axiom gets involved?
So I think it's about giving legal departments strategic flexibility to do more with constrained resources. We're breaking what we call the binary model. So that traditional model, I think, forced a choice between, do we either hire a permanent headcount in-house to do this work, or do we go to a very expensive law firm? And we've created that strategic additional pillar of flexible legal talent. And I think that's been the biggest change over the last 25 years, is that addition of that layer of flexible talent that you see with in-house teams.
Maybe I'm imagining this, but I sort of get the sense that if you're a general counsel, if you're part of the in-house team, when you engage a law firm, of course they want to work in partnership with you and all of that, but to some extent you kind of turn it over to them and then they come back to you with advice. Whereas if the flexible model, if I've got it right, it's almost sort of, well, we can bring someone into work much more sort of on our side of the table.
That's absolutely true. We become an extension of your team, flexible extension, unlike a law firm, as you point out. And in addition to that, I guess what you would call a fourth pillar is how we pair technology with our lawyers and with our talent, as we call them. And that pairing of AI tools with legal professionals who understand implementation, they understand supervision, they understand optimization. Axiom is becoming the largest pool of AI-enabled lawyers globally, if it isn't already. And that enables legal departments to scale capacity. It provides that flexibility they don't necessarily have with law firms. It enables them to allocate budgets more strategically. and they can do more with less money, which is a trend that we're seeing. So we're helping clients transform from that sort of cost center to a more strategic business partner.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure we're going to come back to AI in a bit, but if you could, maybe you could describe a bit about what Axiom's strategy is. What's the core bet the firm's making about where the legal market's heading?
So the legal market, from my perspective, is really mainstreaming what was once alternative. And I'm very keen to drop the alternative from alternative legal services provider. We're no longer alternative. Flexibility is becoming the new normal. And that market transformation is being led by unprecedented budget pressure, AI disruption, talent challenges, and those in-house departments are constantly and consistently turning to Axiom to help them get that critical work done without the burden of law firm expenditure. As for our strategy, there's, I think, what you would call three converging forces. There's economic reality. Okay, so you've got this situation of, if we take tariffs, one general counsel said to me, the only certainty about tariffs is the tariff of uncertainty. And it creates a sustained pressure to do more with less. You've got technology disruption. You've got departments implementing AI, for example, without any dedicated funding. That's another opportunity. And then the third bit is the talent evolution, where we're seeing more and more lawyers considering joining flexible legal talent providers like Axiom because they really want to continue to practice law, but as we say, they want a new life in the law, and that's what we provide. So a sort of strategic response to that has evolved really just from offering pure secondments, which is what we've been used to and what we're known for in the market, to providing, in addition to that, specialized advice, projects, tech plus talent. We have a digital marketplace online. So that deep investment that we have made has been a critical strategic maneuver on our part to really assist these clients to get to a better place rather than just relying on the traditional law firm route.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like that's been a sort of evolving strategy, that you started one place and then saw a market opportunity and expanded out, saw a technology trend and followed it. Is that how it happened, or was there some other process? How'd you go about developing that strategy?
So I think the strategy emerges from deep client listening combined with data-driven insights. We undertake as an organization thousands of meetings every month to understand the pain points of these clients. We have over 3,500 client relationships providing continuous feedback. We have a very much evidence-based approach. We commission a number of independent research reports every year, speaking with senior legal leaders, GCs, chief legal officers, and DGCs, but also CFOs as well from 8 different countries. And that continuous feedback loop really helps us develop that strategy and helps it to continue to develop and morph into what you see today. We also have a bottom-up insight approach. So obviously we have a number of sales and client success teams that surface those emerging needs in addition to the data that we see from those independent research reports. And it allows us to do some sort of rapid prototyping, as I would call it, which has led to our AI solution. But it also allows us to get very quickly external validation of what we're doing. So in addition to partnering with those research firms, we also engage with industry bodies like CLOC, with the ACC, Legal Futures and others, where we monitor competitor moves, but we lead with client needs. And having been one of the founding members really of Bloomberg Law some 18 or more years ago, it taught me that transformation requires reshaping perspectives of professionals entrenched in established tools and established ways of doing things, shall we say. And the legal world is one that is normally quite resistant to change. So what we're seeing is, I think, that sort of catalyst of AI and private equity and others that are really forcing a change in the market.
Just so I can kind of understand the how of that a bit better. I hear you've got a very rich flow of information and data and perspectives from the external world, which many people when they're doing strategy are often sort of weak on. That's really great. But if you could take me into the room when the strategy actually happens, would that happen almost like on an ongoing basis, week by week? Oh, we should be looking at that opportunity. Or is it once a year or once every 5 years? How often do you sort of say, we're going to step back and look at our strategy? Do you ever do that?
I think it's very purposeful. We have spent a considerable amount of time and resources coming up with the current strategy. We don't flip-flop strategies. I think we have a very clear path forward about how we want to become the largest tech-enabled AI legal services provider in the world, which is sort of the way forward and where we see the most opportunity. We are, however, I will say, I think nimble enough and agile enough as an organization that where we do see opportunities, we can pivot quite quickly to take advantage of those. So it's not quite like turning a ship around in the middle of the ocean, as they say. We do have that flexibility to be able to pivot quickly. And what you've seen over the last 18 months with the advent of AI and the conversations that keep developing, we have very quickly been able to pivot as an organization to be able to pilot quite extensively several AI platforms to then be able to equip our lawyers with those. We had 8 AI tools, 27 teams. It took 8 months. And only a company like Axiom that has that agility can pull off such a pilot, which enables us to sort of get those technologies out in front of both our lawyers and our clients.
You've mentioned it a number of times, that AI kind of commitment and the investment must have been a pretty important strategic decision over the last 2 years, maybe the big one. Who's involved in that? Was that sort of you in a room by yourself? Was it you and some of your colleagues around the world? How did that happen?
So that was really driven by our CEO and the executive leadership team. Obviously, when it came to the pilot itself, it involved very much, obviously, our lawyers, our clients. It also was the bottom-up process that I mentioned earlier of insights coming from the field, from both our salespeople, from people looking after our customers, to the people looking after our lawyers. So it really was a collective feedback loop that we had that enabled us to come up with this strategy.
Let's dive straight into the AI topic then. If you can, help me understand what you see as the big misconceptions that legal leaders have about AI.
I'm sort of smiling a little bit here, Belden, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions that are going on at the moment. I think the biggest misconception is that AI is primarily about technology selection, whereas I think it's also about organizational readiness. So I think the biggest misconception is that you can leapfrog digital transformation. And I think some departments think they can use AI to overcome neglected digital transformation. The reality is you can't just graft an AI solution over messy internal systems, messy internal processes. It just compounds cost and time exponentially. And the unglamorous prerequisite to all of this is just getting your house in order, normalizing documentation, templates, metadata, document management. That's all sort of within scope. I think the next misconception is that AI tools work straight out of the box. There was a recent Stanford research report, and I'm sure these platforms are getting better, but AI systems do hallucinate, and they do create, in 17 to 33% of queries, they were providing false answers, and despite what other vendors may claim. And that's what sort of led us to test with rigor these 8 tools with these 27 teams over 8 months. And law firm partners, let's be honest, aren't really equipped to pressure test AI tools. That's not their business model. And as far as private practice is concerned, AI, I think, is an existential threat to the billable hour. So there's probably little interest from certainly the major firms to continue to think about how this could cannibalize the goose that laid the golden egg, really, in terms of the billable hour. I think there's another misconception around funding. AI adoption doesn't need funding, I think, is a big misconception. I think there is a huge need for dedicated funding to go into AI. So I think that's something firms have to think about. 78% of departments from one of our research reports expected to implement AI without any dedicated funding, which is a huge number. And I think that's partly to blame on the many free platforms that are out there. So meaningful implementation requires investment in technology. It requires investment in training. It requires investment in your talent as well. And I think the last big one is risk awareness equals risk management. So we're all aware of the risks of AI, but that doesn't mean to say you're necessarily managing that risk. And whilst I think a lot of departments recognize that it poses moderate to high risk, I think what we're seeing is very few have implemented basic safeguards. Even fewer have implemented usage policies or brought in AI experts or conducted pilots or even trained their staff on how to use it. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions. And I think the last misconception is just about the right mindset, right? So AI should augment lawyers, not replace them. And I think a lot of people have talked about, well, who are we replacing with this technology? And it's very much a starting point, not a destination. So I'm sure you would have heard of this notion of human in the loop. So integrating human intelligence with automated systems to improve accuracy and reliability. So that success requires pairing AI tools with legal talent who understand implementation, supervision, and optimization.
As you may know, we've been doing some research on how law firms are approaching AI. So not so much focused on the in-house angle, and certainly we haven't been looking at the model that Axiom uses. We've seen, almost by default, people end up drifting into an automation mindset. You know, a sort of, what work are we doing now that we can turn over the machine? And very few seem to be really having a go at how can we augment, how can we make it so we can provide not less expensive, but better, whatever better might mean for our clients. I'm just wondering, have you been exploring that space? Because it sounds like you're thinking that it can't just be all about replacing what people are doing with some kind of machine. What's that experience been like if you've been poking down that road at all?
So I think what you're talking about there is maybe some root and branch change that we're seeing with clients and how clients operate. And I think AI is catalyzing fundamental shifts in how legal departments structure work, how they allocate resources, and also how they measure value as well. So I think we're seeing a bit of talent strategy transformation where they're prioritizing skills in AI literacy, data analysis capabilities. I think you're seeing changes to budgeting model evolution. So I think how clients wish to move to a more, what I would call, value-based performance. I think you're looking at work prioritization discipline, if I can call it that. You know, this notion that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority.
In plain English, what does that actually mean? What are in-house teams needing to do they're not doing around prioritization?
So I think it's prioritizing. For example, I've spoken to a number of clients who have said it's important that we get self-service and templated solutions rolled out for low-risk matters that our internal clients can do themselves, right? So you think of NDAs, for example, and freeing up capacity. So it's how do you free up capacity? How do you prioritize the work that you're doing? How do you make it more strategic and valuable for the organization? I think legal departments will be the first to admit that they're not the best at promoting all the great work that they're doing in-house. So they need to do a better job of that. And I think by prioritizing some of that strategic work to make them more effective and also to then triage those risks. So, you know, the high risk stuff stays with the senior folks within the department. Other things can be sort of devolved to flexible resourcing solutions like Axiom, but really being quite ruthless in how they prioritize what they have to do. And then performance measurement, I think that really then boils down to how are they monitoring their performance? How are they driving value? How are they driving partnerships with people outside of the legal department, like with the CFO? And moving from the sort of cost metrics, which everyone, let's be honest, looks at the legal department as a cost metric, to a value metric.
Hearing what you're saying, I could see how, given the experience Axiom has, and given kind of the mindset that you've got and the way you're coming at some things, I could see how you might move from being a sort of legal services provider to what I might call a professional services provider around law and legal matters. And what do I really mean by that? I could see how you might, maybe you already are, consulting to internal teams about here's how you could be more strategic. Here's how you might want to be training and developing your people. Here's how you ought to be making the case internally for a budget for AI, because our experience is you're never going to get to where you need to be on a non-budget, non-investment basis. Are you seeing any signs of that? Are you anticipating clients might want that?
Absolutely. I think we have an enormous opportunity to partner with clients to identify the type of dynamic expertise to help and sustain high-performing legal departments. I think people often engage in conversations with us just because they would like to know what everyone else is up to in the space. We conduct thousands of meetings every month. And so the amount of internal knowledge we possess as a legal services provider on what exactly is happening with the market in certain industries, what's happening with certain practice areas, is invaluable for our clients. And they engage on a daily basis, not just because they're in need of a lawyer to join their in-house team, but because they really want to take a deep dive into what's happening with the market, what's happening with AI, what is our approach, and we are really seen as a thought leader in that space. So I think you're right. By virtue, we are providing not just great talent and AI-enabled talent, we're also providing a sort of a consultation to our clients and future clients in the industry.
What about law firms? I mean, do you see them sort of as competition, or do you also possibly see them as clients? Maybe they already are clients.
I tell you what we are seeing, which has been very interesting this year. We have seen a sharp increase in the amount of work that we have been offered to undertake as a legal services provider that would have otherwise gone to law firms. And I think you're seeing a disintegration of what many have called the law firm panel. So, where you have this situation where you have a panel of firms. I think you're seeing clients push a lot of work out to all sorts of different providers, not just the likes of Axiom and law firms, but many others out there that offer similar services in an attempt to really get the best value for money and to see what's out there. And it's a little bit odd in the current market that we're in. If you're narrowing down your law firm panel to 3 or 4 firms, I mean, you're almost creating a monopoly. And why do that when you've got the possibility to go to 10 or 12 different firms to look for a solution? So we are very much seeing an increase in the amount of work that we're taking from law firms and continue to take from law firms, where quite frankly, they don't need a large law firm to be able to undertake some of this work. It is more project based. It is specialized in nature, but you don't really have to pay £500 or £600 an hour to get that done. And I think that has come about because of economic necessity. I think it's come about because there are options out there and because people do recognize that the quality of lawyers that you can get from a company like Axiom are as good, if not better, than the ones that you find in a law firm. So it's sort of the perfect storm of competition as far as we're concerned, and we welcome it. Having said that, we do partner with law firms on occasions where it makes sense, where there's maybe a joint client involved. We would absolutely collaborate with a law firm, and they sometimes approach us looking for help. So I think I really see the future of Axiom's business going into 2026 as hoovering up more of that law firm style work.
Are there any patterns to what kind of work that's showing up now? Is it things that are sort of more AI friendly, if I could put it that way, feel like they're the sort of things that ought to be going through a technology route anyway? Is it by type of issue? Is there any patterns you can see in that?
No, that's a great question. I think, if I look at the work in Europe, obviously commercial contract work lends itself nicely to AI. Regulatory and compliance work is another big chunk of what we do. Data privacy, obviously in Europe, is another huge practice area for us. So I would say those are probably the big three. If you look at M&A, which we also do, if you look at companies that are going through divestitures, companies in the real estate where they may have thousands of leases and thousands of contracts that they have to go through, I mean, that's perfect for AI disruption. So we're seeing it really across the board.
Coming back to the strategy question for a minute, you mentioned the 16 practice areas. If I was speaking to you 3 or 4 years ago, would that have been 12 and you've added 4 more? Or is it, no, we started with 16 and it's 16 now and we think it's going to be 16 in, 5 years?
I'd say we've been in those practice areas. I mean, the extent to which we're in them fluctuates constantly. You can think of something like data privacy, for example. I mean, that's just grown exponentially over the last few years, and I think will continue to grow. Some of them are market driven. Obviously, M&A has taken a bit of a nosedive, but has picked back up. You can think of regulatory and compliance issues. The financial services realm has been relatively quiet recently from a regulatory perspective, but you never know. I mean, it doesn't take much for something to suddenly come back into vogue, or there's a big investigation or a compliance issue somewhere, and suddenly, things shift very, very rapidly.
Any advice you might give to other leaders of professional services firms that are trying to sort of navigate disruptions around AI and all the other things you talked about while keeping their people engaged and purposeful?
I would lead with transparency, empower your team, make strategic bets on flexibility is my advice. I think, you have to define your why and communicate it relentlessly. That sort of purpose drives every decision. At Axiom, we're not just providing talent, we're transforming how legal work gets done globally. So I think give your team a mission. When professionals understand they're part of industry transformation, I think then engagement follows. And being in this space for 30 years now, if it's taught me one thing being in the vendor space, and that's people want to be part of something meaningful. They want to be part of change, and they want to be part of something that is going to be transformative, not just incremental change. That's incredibly important. And the opportunity we have in the legal space to transform perspectives on how that work is getting done and how things are structured, I think is a great opportunity, and not one that you have many of. I would also say invest heavily in your team's growth, invest in their capabilities, create space for experimentation. That's our advice to clients as well. I would build culture around flexibility and autonomy and trust. It requires trust and empowerment, not just micromanagement, which is quite suffocating. So give professionals ownership of client relationships and those outcomes. And I think if I translate that onto the lawyer side, our model proves that those high caliber lawyers want autonomy, they want purpose, they want to be continuing to practice law because they love the law. They just want a new life in it, and they don't want to cling to those sort of rigid structures. And professional services firms that cling to those rigid structures will lose their best people. The other pieces of advice, I've got lots of them, Belden. I could go on here.
Good. Keep going, Daniel. This is great.
I would lead with data as well, not assumptions. So I think we've seen real value in commissioning real research anonymously into things like AI adoption, into budgeting. I think you've got to test rigorously before committing. I think you share that data with your team because I think that transparency builds trust. I think you embrace the yes and philosophy, but act thoughtfully. So don't wait for perfect clarity. Uncertainty rarely resolves on a predictable timeline, which lawyers don't like, right? I think they want all the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And I think sometimes, I did have this conversation with a GC once, and it was in a recent article I wrote, but, recognizing that sometimes doing something is more dangerous than doing nothing. And I think in the current world we find ourselves in, sometimes people are thinking, I've got to do something. And sometimes that is more dangerous than doing nothing. So I think you have to balance speed with strategic thinking. And at Axiom, we've evolved from, as I say, this pure secondment business to this comprehensive portfolio of what we offer. And that's all come about through that speed, but also strategic thinking. I've got a couple of others, Belden, if you want me to.
Daniel, go for it.
So the other advice I would give is always play to win, especially during periods of uncertainty. Adaptability isn't just a tactical choice, it's a long-term advantage. I would play to win. I think we're at a tipping point in the legal market, and what was once what we call alternative is becoming mainstream, and the leaders who thrive will be those who see disruption as an opportunity, not a threat. Position your firm at the center of transformation, not on the sidelines, watching it happen. And on a personal note, leadership transforms uncertainty into cohesion. So when people feel supported, they're more resilient. Your job isn't to eliminate uncertainty, it's to give your team purpose, it's to give them tools, it's to trust them, and to give them confidence to navigate that uncertainty. And when you do that well, disruption becomes your competitive advantage.
In order to what? So we've redefined it. How's the world a better place? Because I think you've got great answers for that, but I don't know if I've heard them yet.
So I think if you look at as I called it at the beginning, the binary model that's existed, you've got this very staid model of either you hire people in-house or you go to a law firm. And that's expensive. It's not necessarily the best option. You're engaging potentially law firms that may or may not understand your business model. They may or may not understand the corporate structure you operate in or your products or your services. So it's far from ideal. You've then got this economic pressure to do more with less. You've got tightened budgets. How do you then, as a legal department, become a true value creator in the organization, and you move away from this moniker of a cost center or this moniker of a department that slows things down, which I don't think is the case with in-house teams. So it's how you move from that two-pillar structure to that third or four-pillar structure, where you're creating a competitive advantage really from the legal department, because you are being more nimble, more agile. You are able to scale up and down based on demand. I just mentioned, the financial services sector, it only takes one regulatory case or one compliance issue and suddenly it's all hands on deck. So how do you scale capacity up and down? How do you become more nimble? And how do you access that specialized expertise and create these extensions to your team that are flexible and they can come in and out flexibly? That's what we're seeing. And how do you then, I think, layer over AI to deploy it safely with experienced guidance and help transform your legal in-house team from cost center to a strategic business partner?
I think I hear in that less waste, less people doing things that somehow don't actually deliver value, and maybe the actual experience that people have, your employees and your clients, is somehow a more satisfying, better experience, less frustration, less waste. That's sort of what I think I'm hearing in there is, how's it all better? Why is the world a better place? Because Axiom exists. I think I'm hearing, for at least your clients and your employees, their work life better and more satisfying. Less waste, less frustration, more strategic. Does that ring a bell, or is that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this. I think if you look at it from what we're offering lawyers that come and join Axiom, we're giving them that flexibility. We're giving them opportunity to work with some amazing clients across all sorts of different matters in, quite frankly, companies or areas they probably would never have the opportunity to work in. So from a work-life balance, from a new life in the law, yes, I think we are offering opportunities to lawyers that don't exist elsewhere. And we are allowing them to become those extensions of in-house teams they may never get to see or work with. And so I think from that perspective, there's a huge opportunity for legal talent in the current market. I think when you look at it from the client side, when you speak to these GCs, the amount of money that is being spent on law firms is eye-watering. I mean, sums of money that really just stop you dead in your tracks and get you thinking, how is it possible to spend this amount of money? And when you speak to GCs, I think one of the common themes we hear is the value that that's deriving is not as much as that sum of money would suggest you're getting. And when you see some of the nine figures that are being spent on legal bills by some of the world's largest corporations, it just doesn't add up, quite frankly. And you think, how are you delivering value to your shareholders spending that amount? How are you possibly delivering value to your employees by spending that amount? And where else could that money be better deployed? And I think what then drove some of that was this offshoring. Offshoring over the last 15, 20 years has been big. I think with AI, what you will see is reshoring. That is to say, those jobs potentially coming back to the US, the UK, continental Europe. You will see maybe a small team of lawyers with AI solutions able to undertake work that was being done by dozens or hundreds of lawyers elsewhere. I was listening to a general counsel in India recently who said AI is an existential threat to the Indian economy. So if you think about that and the number of jobs that in-house teams and law firms have put out overseas, you're seeing, I think, a number of those jobs, tens, hundreds of thousands of those jobs will probably disappear. And you'll be able to reshore in-house where you know the business, you know your clients, you know your business lines, you know your products and services and customers, and you'll be able to drive more value for the business from an in-house team, not from overseas, not from a law firm. And we're excited to be a part of that growth proposition for those in-house teams and as I say, become an extension of them.
Yeah, that does sound exciting. Is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners, either about yourself or about Axiom or about AI or the legal field?
I think I have a personal passion for seeing people succeed, and I think that's what's driving Axiom's transformation as well. We have an enormous opportunity to partner with clients to identify right dynamic expertise to help build and sustain those legal departments. And we are at a very rare point in history where we're seeing a huge forcing mechanism, which really is AI, that at least challenges the dominance of law firms and how this work gets done. And I think it's a very exciting time to be around. I think it's exciting at last to see the changes that are long overdue in this space. And we're thrilled to be a part of it and continue to be a growing part of it.
Well, Daniel, that's maybe a good note to end on. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing both your own experiences as well as kind of what you and Axiom are up to and aiming to get done. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Belden. And given the rapid pace of change in this area, I'd be delighted to come back in a few months to give you and the listeners an update on where we are and what's happened.
That sounds great, Daniel. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Belden.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.